How should we start?
Yeah, so we haven't rehearsed anything, so.
I'll start. Can I start?
Sure.
I was very, very, very excited when you received your Guggenheim Award.
Tell me about it.
I thought it was so deserved and so earned, and such a remarkable thing for the Oregon ecology of art viewing and art history. And I think that one of the reasons that you did receive that award was based on the subject matter that we see in this room today. And I think it would be a really great start to maybe talk about how this body of work came. Because if you walk in, obviously, if you are not familiar with your work, if somebody just walks in as a viewer, they see these most sumptuously beautiful landscapes, and there's so much more.
So that's really critical to the work itself, that it be kind of pulling you in by just being paintings.
Very sexy paintings.
I kind of think about the importance of the subject matter and the importance that the paintings stand on their own as paintings as being completely equal. Not that the subject is more important than how the subject is represented, and not that the painting is more important than it's unimportant that we know kind of what they're about. So they kind of need each other. I think that they look the way they look with that quality because of a nearly 40-year practice of plein air painting that I have. And in the early 1980s, when I was living in Cyprus, in the island of Cyprus, all those years ago, and strapping my easel on my back and walking into the countryside and just setting up and painting what I was looking at, it laid the foundation for being able to make these paintings, which are not painted that way at all. They're painted from Google Earth images that I find just traveling to these sites. And then make studio fabrications and inventions, thinking about these sites. But at the heart of it, there's always that need to be able to walk into that place and kind of step into the landscape the way you do when you're actually painting in the face of nature.
When you work on these, I have two questions actually. How deep do you dive on the information before you start? And then what is the real juicy part is, what are you thinking or feeling as you're actually painting? Is it purely an act of painting a landscape, or are you deep in what actually happened, and how does that mesh?
I would love to talk about that. The way that the paintings begin, I notice, just like anybody notices when you open the newspaper or you hear on the radio or you watch the news hour or whatever it is, when there's been another blah 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 in so and so, such and such, and so many people, and all of that. It hits me just the way it hits you and anybody who is sentient and conscious, I would hope. So I just make a notation now that this happened, and at some point I'll go back and I'll look and see. I'm trying not to prioritize. Like, this one's more devastating than that one, which is why we can have a painting for Aurora, Illinois, where a guy is dissatisfied with what happened in his work situation in his private life, and just had enough and decided he was going to leave the planet, and goddamn if I'm going to go by myself, so I'm going to, there's that. Or the synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which of course has a whole different connotation, the meaning, the what's really happening there as a whole. It connotes something other than simple personal tragedy, and it's not more important than the other. So they're the same size painting, and they have the same investment of engagement in the process of making the painting. And in my experience in the studio, I'm having the same response. It's a balance in this weird dance between being really happy and excited and joyous, because paint does that to me when I'm painting, and getting slapped upside my head by myself and that own happiness when I realize that it's completely effed up to be in that position when you have to be, when you think about what it is the topic is. So it's a yo-yo for me in the studio. And in the studio, I'll find myself dancing and laughing and crying, and in the same painting session.
You use the same, same tools, there's no change from your standard landscape practice, you're not?
Zero.
Okay, no different kind of body dance or anything like that?
Okay.
No, the paintings that I would make that are pure, just paintings that I make based on the natural world are the same tools and same approaches to this. And those tools are various. I mean, I use big chunks of cardboard to move paint around, and rollers and brayers and brushes and rags. But that's what I would do no matter what. Painting a human head, somebody sitting in front of me. Some of you have been my subjects that you sat for me. Others in this room have sat for me as a subject, and you can see that process reveals itself. It's just...
Have you been to any of these places? Have you gone down to Roseburg by any chance?
I've been to Roseburg, but not because of this. And in fact, I've been to almost all of these places incidentally, not because of this, because of the shootings and the violence that happened there, but because I travel and I get out in the world. And I think that that's also at the heart of why a lot of these places feel as if they actually are there, because of the coloration of sky is not the same in El Paso as it is in Parkland, Florida, or in Gilroy, California. And that's not a thing that I'm saying. I'm doing research like, what does the sky really look like there? It sort of is completely intuitive and internal and visceral, but I think it's truthful.
Could you talk about your color a little bit?
Sure, yeah.
Because I've said, pardon me if you've heard me say this before, I think I maybe oversaid it, but I've often, one of the reasons, I've been looking at your work now for about 40 years.
Oh, you're the one.
I think we did a first look at your work when I was at Maryhill Museum and was just a kid curator director. But the work has stayed with me very profoundly over the years. And I think one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about your work is that I feel your work in my body. When I stand in front of your paint, it could be a plein air painting of Soviet Island, it could be one of these paintings, it could be certainly a print or a portrait. I end up feeling the sensations of your work in my body, and I think that's a real acid test of art that's powerful and meaningful and needs to be in the world. And I always try to dissect it, like what is it about it? And I think part of it for me is the color. I think there's an issue of color that really strikes me. Like when I walked in here to see this sky, it was, I felt it in my breath pattern. And can you talk about color a little bit? Because I think you are such a colorist. And that's, to me, that's very much part of the power of your work.
Color
layering,
is critical
sure.
to me, and if you look at paintings, if you're a painter and you look at paintings, you probably look at paintings differently than if you simply are looking at paintings, if you appreciate looking at art or whatever. And I speak with my students about this a lot, that when we are making a painting, of course the image is an element in the painting, but most of us, well, most of you, who think about a painting as the picture. Most people who are not painters, I should say, think about a painting as the picture, and that's the most important element. And I don't look at it like that. I think the painter looks at the object that's being made, thinks about the sort of visceral impact that happens in the making, feels the palpable stuff of the material, and recognizes that the image has impact and meaning. It's just that the image, bless you, it's just that the image has so much more initial impact. You know what I mean? We see the picture and that we think that that's what the painting is. And then if we give it time, and this is at the heart of this project too, if we give it time, we find ourselves entering that painting.
Yes.
And for me, color is something that happens in a layered way, in a somewhat complex way. It's like if you look at this painting for Parkland, Florida, and the shootings that happened at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, not even 2 years ago, there's a kind of a complexity to the color that is the sky. It's not just a blue sky and white clouds and green trees. It's an odd sort of glowing blue sky as a result of beginning with this kind of strange pink color that got laid down first in setting up the structure of the painting, and then ragging it over the surface to kind of mess it up a little bit so that I'm not intimidated to go continue. There's strategies that painters create for themselves. And then in the next layers of putting some of those blues and grays and whites and yellows on top of it, maybe taking some of that off so that some of that pink comes back through and visually electrifies things. You know, the impact just in the brain or whatever. It electrifies things. But also, I think conceptually, it electrifies things. It makes me want to get into that space more.
But equal and opposite to that is that you could take a 1 square inch patch of any one of your paintings and enjoy the surface, like the painterliness, the viscosity of the paint and the brush or cardboard dragging through it. I think there's always a really interesting kind of a push-pull between being able to just like dive into this landscape and feel like you're there, and then reminding your viewers that this is in fact a painting that was built and is made with paint. And paint as a building material.
Yeah.
See, I think the paintings, and I got to confess, I've been watching Steve's work forever.
Oh my God, we're so old.
Well, I know.
And
you know, I hate to say this, but it's true. Steve's the only artist in town that I automatically go to look at the work, without doubt, put it on the calendar and everything, because I think it's so great. I'm always enthralled by it. But I think that one of the aspects that I enjoy is that these are always, your work is a moment in time of a place that is pretty much standing still. Yet it's a very simplistic view. Yet the paint is moving at a zillion miles an hour.
Yeah.
And that's what I find fascinating, because that engages me constantly in the surface and the detailing and the brush strokes and the movement and the layers and everything. But it's still a single place, which makes me think, how much am I missing? You know, when I'm outside, that is really all going around, you know? Because you do tend to capture it and almost enhance that quality. And so I find that fascinating, that these are really stillness. These are really still places, but the way in which they're construed as this just this dynamic activity, which I find especially effective in dealing with the subject matter.
I think that's because I have basically no interest in making a painting that tells you what a thing looks like, and all interest in telling you what it feels like.
Right, exactly.
That's the difference to me. Is like, it's not a cold process. It's a heated process. You know, it's not a intellectual process. It's an emotional process. To me, I mean, clearly there's lots of technical
Yeah.
stuff going on too, but it's in the service of this emotion. So-
Yes, well said. Can we ask for questions?
Yeah,
from- There's so much here. I feel like we shouldn't dominate the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Stephen, how many paintings are there so far? And how many are still on your list?
So there
yeah.
in fact, I just put out a book that contains most of the over 50 paintings that I've made so far. That book in the audience somewhere, you can pass it around. Good. you can pass it-
Is this the blue?
Yeah, you can pass it
More
around.
about that,
I think there are 50 paintings in that book.
50
And-
you've created so far.
50 and more that I just didn't include in there because I didn't have good
Because
photography.
we all lose track.
Oh my
You
gosh,
lose
yes.
track.
You know,
So,
course we do.
I mean, I'll tell you, at the
So many.
opening reception for this exhibition, last 2 Thursdays ago, whatever it was, somebody came to me and said, and of course you're gonna have to make one for Vancouver now. I said, what are you talking about? And while we were having our little festivities and having a good time and drinking wine, some guy had attacked, shot up the retirement home in Vancouver, which is going to be one of the next paintings I make, and the killings that happened in Brooklyn, New York recently. It's another painting that's coming up. And, I mean, if I want to make a painting, it's no problem to find the top.
Stephen, you talked about your students. How does teaching impact your work and process?
Well, I don't know that teaching per se impacts the work, but I think I try and take the attitude in my teaching that it's important to inculcate into the next wave of people who are makers how deeply one needs to engage and invest and the possibility of deep engagement and investment. It doesn't make, like I teach, for instance, I'm teaching beginning painting right now. One of my students is here in the audience. I'm not gonna out this person, but it's the fact that I talk about the materials and how we begin a painting and how to build a stretcher and do all that stuff. It's all in the service of ultimately what does that person want to say? How does that person want to use that knowledge for connection? And I think that some of us will simply want to make pretty things. Some of us will want to change the world, and something in between. A lot of us are in there too. You know what I mean? So I just give everything I know to all of them. And then ultimately, it's up to the individual what to do with it. But don't hold anything back,
You must be very good at it, because when we had the retrospective of your work at the Hoffman Gallery, we had an endless stream of people coming to see that show, and they couldn't wait to tell the gallery attendant, I was a student of Stephen's.
I'm so old.
Wow.
Everybody was a student at one point.
He was like, not just I was a student, but like he really made an impact on the way I make and view art. It was quite profound, and I think, oh my God, I pray at the altars of teachers everywhere, and thank you for doing that hard work of passing on.
I'm in it for the money.
So you're a landscape painter, traditionally. You go out in the field.
I do. I still do.
Paint or take pictures, bring them back to the studio and figure out what you're going to paint. One day you thought, oh, maybe I should do this other thing. What was that? How'd that happen? How did it come
Good
about?
question.
How did you
Specifically
critique it?
this work or in
No, this. How did, in other words,
Specifically
you're going out and looking at landscapes and taking pictures and,
Okay.
and
Sure. Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
and all of a sudden, no,
Okay.
this is a different thing. This is
Yeah, no, I get it.
this is an electronic age. You're
I
in
can
front
go
of the
there.
computer.
Yeah.
You're having to
Yeah.
look through all.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, it's a completely
Yeah.
different
Absolutely.
starting point.
Yeah, no, I get it. So, as I say, I have this 40-year practice of plein air painting, and it's an ongoing practice. I do it still, though now I go out in the summer. It's not an all year round thing. But it's a critical part of the piece of the puzzle because it informs all of the sense of color and structure and sort of what it is to be real in a real body, corporeal and all that stuff. But I also live in the 21st century and feel that this is, I'm part of this continuum of the development of what painting can be. And so over the years, I've introduced glitches into that process. Like, for instance, I used to take my camera out with me driving to get where I was going to paint and just shoot out the window with an SLR camera loaded with slide film. And it was, I had so much of this old Ektachrome that you use with tungsten film and everything, so it wasn't about the color, because when you develop that C41 process, as nobody knows what I'm talking about, but it comes out blue and weird colors, and it's not anything to do with verisimilitude, it's to do with something else, some structure. But useful to me, because I could look at those slides and actually layer them on top of one another and look at them through this little cheapo ACFA viewfinder that I used to have, and I'd see a whole new place. A place that was an invented place that was based on things that were captured photographically, but that were not using a photograph the way we normally think of photography. And then that, to me, was exciting. Oh, I can make a painting about that, and sort of very loosely interpreting that. So I did a whole body of work collectively entitled Terra Incognita, which occupied me for 2 or 3 years. And then my sister Monica, who's in the room here, gave me a Hi8 video camera, and I thought, this is awesome. And so I just shoot the Hi8 video camera out the window and capture things completely drift net fishing, and go back in and plug that into my crummy RCA Trinitron TV that was this big, and tweak the color on the TV and watch that happen, as all the things that I couldn't actually see when I was driving, because you're driving, and that I could kind of revisit and see in a new way, or be informed about what I passed through. And then on the TV, tweaking the colors, I would see them in a weird way, which was kind of cool. And then I would use a SX70 Polaroid camera and take pictures off the TV. This is before we all had our little computers. And take pictures off the TV and get these Polaroids. And those were really interesting to me. And some of them were standalone works, and some of them were basically an inspiration to interpret in paint, because paint is really what I love, the material. And so finding strategies, for me, finding strategies to engage with the making of a painting, and still based in landscape, which is so interesting to me, is at the heart of introducing these technologies. So for this particular body of work, I found myself in Clearmont, I think it's called, Wyoming, at the U-Cross. And Tad, he knew I got this residency to go to U-Cross, and he gave me the sage advice, and I thank you, Yoda, on this one. He said, do you have a plan when you're going to go there? And I said, no. He said, good. Don't have any plans, just go. And so I didn't, and so I get there, and while I'm there, I had this thought, what if I travel around to use Google Earth, because I'd just been introduced to that technology of Google Earth, and I'd never done it. And I thought, okay, so I asked some people, where should I go? Tell me where to go in Google Earth, and I did this and that, and I made little paintings about those things. And while I was there, I had the thought that, I could go to Arles in France. My favorite painter in the whole world, like everybody's, is Vincent van Gogh. And I know it sounds trite, but it's just, it was the shit, right? So I had this thought, what if I go to Arles and just sort of go to all the places that the titles of his paintings are, and look at them and see what Google Earth sees, and then make paintings based on what I find there. And so I did do that, and I made a single painting of a little back alley in Arles, and on the road to Tarascon, and that's the one painting for that. And then in November, and I had traveled to France with my family that fall after this residency, No, I guess it was like right before that. But anyway, I had been in France, and then I'm in the studio making this oil painting when the shootings happened in Paris. And so, since I was in the mode of looking at Google Earth to go to Arles, I just typed in the other places, and I was so struck by how normal things looked, and how mundane things looked, and how excited things were, and how non-tragic it was, and all this stuff, that I made paintings for the Bataclan Music Hall, and the Le Carré Café, and the stadium that was attacked. And then as I'm in there in the studio working on these paintings, I'm thinking, well, shit, I mean, think about Littleton, Colorado, and think about, Oregon,
Yeah.
well, not Roseburg, because it hadn't yet happened, or it happened in October of that year, and so, or think about Eugene, and think about Springfield, and think about, and then the shootings in San Bernardino happened like that, and then so as they started to happen, it seemed like things were getting accelerated, happening more and more and more, and so I just, as it came across, I'd stretch up more canvas. Actually, I had stretched up 12 canvases to make this Arles body of work that I thought I was going to do, and they all got then committed to this.
So are you working on your regular landscapes at the same time you're working on these, or is it
I'm not.
in chunks?
No, I'm not. I mean, I thought that I could, but I
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
This is what I'm doing now.
Okay.
And in the summer, when I go plein air painting, it's a relief,
Mhm.
and I'm not doing that. But I am doing that also in the studio, but the plein air paintings are purely made outdoors. Nothing, they don't get messed around with in the studio. I'm trying not to tell anybody what to think about it exactly, or to prioritize one as being more tragic than another. Though some of them, of course, strike us all as, the high school. And I have to say, this painting here was almost instantaneous in its execution. I shouldn't use that word. These were two older paintings that I had taken off the stretchers, thinking I'll just make some new paintings, and they were just straight up landscape paintings that had nothing to do with this project. And I had just stretched and primed these, and I thought I was going to make 2 new paintings when that happened. And the execution, the actual making of this painting took less than a week from start to finish. So the incident happened on Valentine's Day of 2018. The painting was completed by the 20th of February 2018. And it was partly because of the reaction and the response of the students at the school. They were I really felt like their response gave me so much energy. Like, they're standing up and saying, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, and this is finally going to make a difference. And I felt that energy, and it channeled through into this painting. So it has that kind of vividness as a result. What the truth is that in looking at those images that are found in this process, they don't touch on this. They touch on mundanity. They touch on the quotidian. They touch on just what we all experience. And they're not commenting, they're just reporting. And so these are just reporting as well. And no, not a single image. I usually print off 2 or 3 or 10 or 20, or don't print them off, but I just download them and I have screenshots. And the ones I print off in black and white, so that I'm using them for structure, and the color all comes from me.
Just make one comment or question, kind of, if I may, which is a couple things about this body of work that strike me as somewhat different than some of your other work, Stephen, is because you're using Google Earth, the perspective, the road is very prominent. I know you've taken many landscapes before, and the images were taken from a road, but there's something different when it's one kind of vantage point that you were using versus some kind of mechanized thing on top of many cameras in it. And so much of, there's often in the past in your landscape been kind of a pathway or a waterway or something that kind of offered an entry point, but there's something really, not all of them, but many of them there's a prominence of a path or of an entry point or a road, which I think is interesting, and I think it invites you into it in a certain way, and gives it kind of that mundane element maybe that you mentioned. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that. And then I also think it's interesting, sometimes sometimes the work that's political or has a kind of a poignant conceptual framework for its existence that has the highest impact is the one where the political implication is internalized. So, it's a beautiful painting, or it's a beautiful photograph, or it's a beautiful, whatever. But when I know the information about where it is with the title or whatever, then the implication of the kind of the dread, Dan referred to the dread or the horror or whatever, that implication is internalized, which I think maybe packs a lot of punch, if you will. I don't know if you want to comment on that, and then I think we might be done. Maybe it'll be about an hour and 15 minutes.
So, clearly the internalized part is nothing that anybody can predict. For me, they're all sort of quasi-internalized, or I wouldn't have chosen to make those paintings. But, for instance, a painting that was in a different exhibition here for San Bernardino, obviously that name probably still resonates with people. We remember that name. Maybe it's just because of the musicality of the name, and so it sticks with us, and then we still connect it up to the incidents of that shooting at the. But the person who purchased that painting, and that painting was purchased that painting in spite of the fact that that's where we're shooting at. Purchased that painting because her husband grew up in San Bernardino. It was such a beautiful evocation of that place. She loved her husband. She wanted to give him something beautiful for, and it's like, oh, really? And then at the same time, really? It's like, that's a confusion to me. Or a painting for St. Paul, Minnesota. The couple who purchased that painting, they know what that painting.
Oh, that was us, by the way, and.
Let's talk about it. I wasn't going to out you there.
That's okay. I just want to say, though, that when you live with these paintings and you know that they are connected to an event of violence, a quick, harsh, violent incident, there's a gravitas to that. There's a gravity to the work where you appreciate the beauty even more. Partly because there's a feeling, I don't want to forget that something terrible happened there. I understand about the dread and the anxiety about looking at work where you're documenting something that's happened, but there's a kind of beauty in that you can remember, but still enjoy the beauty of it.
That's great. I wasn't going to out you there. I was just going to talk about it conceptually.
Because
Yeah.
you can live with this work and love it.
Yeah.
And-
Yes.
So in terms of the question about the road, though, two things really specific. One is just the nature of how the images are, cars are on roads, right? But the other is it's a really useful device for making sure that you enter that space. When Gilberti or whoever it was that brought us, reminded us about linear perspective and invading the surface of that two-dimensional plane and taking us back into that. It invites us in. It doesn't keep us on the surface. It doesn't intellectualize. It emotionalizes. When we're invited in, we're moved by that invitation. When we're kept on the surface, we're asked to do even more work, to get in. And in this work, I think it's important that you be asked in.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
It's a good place.
All right.
Invitation is a good place.
Thank you for coming.